because their PC or whatever's down. They want to be back up. They don't want to go through a reinstall again in most cases. And that some of us have dealt with some of these applications, these oddball applications that you don't find on a shelf at Best Buy, where it's a manual licensing activation. Oh, you formatted the PC. Ooh, there's your license.
Right. Like, yeah, some shop computers, places that run shops, they have, they actually, I had to do data recovery on a computer because the only way to transfer the license was to deactivate the license on the current machine.
Was that some type of drafting program?
Yes.
Yes.
You had to you had to run some utility to get a code that proved you deactivated, or they would not give you any license. So if your computer got stolen, burned in a fire, hard crash, you couldn't get it back, they would not give you a license.
Yeah.
Jeez. I remember I had to do data recovery and get a computer working just to be able to get to run that utility. And when I got it and gave me utility, it's okay, thanks. You can throw that computer away now.
Was it the Bentley MicroStation, out of pure curiosity?
Was it what?
Bentley MicroStation, the application that you're talking about?
No, it didn't sound that. I don't think that was it.
Okay.
But they spent some money fixing that computer just to get the code because the license was so expensive.
Yeah. And again, and the reason we're talking about this, because if you're into the habit of just nuking the PC, and this is stuff that if you didn't know, that one application Matt Rainey's talking about, you just caused a big headache for that business. I mean, you're costing them money because the PC's not up. Alrighty.
Yeah. So we got some emails.
Well, you had two more things about.
We'll save that. We'll save those.
After I got awesome screenshots.
Did you really?
My hard work down the drain, Matt Rainey.
Well, that's some work for next week that you saved.
Oh, okay, cool. All right, got a couple emails here. Let me see here. All right, this one is from Jeff. This is about our last episode about the VLANs. Says, hey man, Lalo, I have a couple of questions about VLANs that were not brought up in episode 56. I have read that there is a security risk associated with using VLAN 1, since that is a default/native VLAN used by all switches. Apparently, there are some attacks that can allow the bad guy to gain access to the default native VLAN. So if you're running your private network on VLAN 1, then it may be possible for an unwanted individual to access the private network. In addition, if the management interface of the switch is on the default native VLAN 1 also, an intruder gets access to that VLAN, there is potential for them to gain access to the switch and mess things up. Is this still a security risk, or does the newest equipment prevent such attacks? So let's address that first question first, because he has two of them.
Okay. I'm not an expert on VLANs, but I'll tell you the way I know of them. The management interface, at least on the switches I have, they're separate. So no one's plugged into that. That's a separate interface that's separate from everything else. So you'd have to actually go walk up to it and plug in a computer into that port. But yes, if you can plug into the management interface, you can do whatever you want usually, because that's what it's for.
And go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, and I'm gonna say I think some of the switches, depending on the iOS, all the other ports have access to VLAN 1, so some people will change the management VLAN to a different VLAN, or they'll remove a VLAN 1 from the other ports. And again, we're getting off way too deep in the water here. This is a risk for some people, but there are articles, and in fact, Cisco has a document where if you're worried about this, there are some other best practices like changing the management, the VLAN. I believe I don't have the URL, but I was reading this a little bit earlier today. I don't know. I mean, I guess it would be a potential security.
Yeah, risk. There's always a security risk. I mean, one thing you can do is, if they can get on VLAN 1, so to get on VLAN 1, you have to have a network jack that somebody can plug into, right?
Mm-hmm.
So with anything, network ports that aren't being used should be disconnected from the switch or disabled.
Right, or shut down.
Switch, you can disable them.
Right.
Now that's not going to prevent somebody from unplugging a computer and plugging theirs in, but of course that's going to be a risk no matter what. But yeah, there are going to be some risks with any networking devices. There's going to be some risk somewhere. Um, but yeah, it's a good point. Good thing to bring up on those.
Yes, very good point, Jeff. And we'll jump into question number 2 of the email. When the watch guard was hooked up to the switch, you used 2 separate cables. Now he is referring to, I believe, when you had, let's set up your wireless environment, right, with a private and with a public network.
Right, we had the trusted network going to one port, and we had the optional network going to another. Right.
Right. So when a watch guard was hooked up to the switch, you used 2 separate cables, one for the private network and one for the public. Could you have just used one cable and configured that one port on the watch guard to carry VLAN 1 and 2 along with telling the watch guard that VLAN 2 was an optional network?
Let me think about that. And I think the answer is no. No, I think the answer is going to be no on that, because you configure those ports. So I can configure port 1 to be a trusted network, and there's like 5 ports on there, and you have to tell inside the router, inside the device, which one each is for. So they're separated by default, but if you define it as trusted, that's trusted. If you find the next one as another network, that's another network. So I don't think that would work.
Okay. The document that Computer Pro found for me that I read a little bit earlier is tinyurl.com. 5 sits Bravo Whiskey Delta, and it's about a third way down. And again, it's a good read, especially when we're talking about VLANs here. But it's I just read it. Precautions for the use of VLAN 1. But again, it's a good article. Thank you, Computer Pro, for the link.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's nice. That's good. Thank you.
Alrighty. Our next email comes from Chris. Man, Analo, thanks for the advice. Here's the updated info you requested. I believe Chris had a server that was really slow, and the client wanted to just buy a new beefy server, and we were questioning if the server was the actual issue, if it was a switch, or if there was other problems here that implementing a new server would not have fixed. All right, so, and we had asked Chris for updated information about the environment. So here we go. System is slow even if one computer is on. Disabling the antivirus did not help. It's Norton 2012 antivirus. It is a switch, not a hub, just 10100. They also do Microsoft Office, WebJunk, etc. Nothing major, and all of it runs okay. Nothing really to compare Dynamics to. Dynamics opens a little quicker on the server as the workstations. Around 4 minutes on the server and 5 on the workstations. Once it's up, it runs fine. Windows opens right away. Reports come up, etc., etc. This is my only client with Dynamics, so I'm not sure if the startup time is normal. 5 minutes seems slow to me, though. They want a server for the redundancy, and they want a new one no matter what. So a server is what they'll get, all right? The workstations are not that old, and the specs are decent. Dynamic is version 10, and they'll be upgrading to version 2010 R2 when we install the new server. I think that's everything you asked for. If not, let me know. He also says, Matt, I remember hearing you say you wouldn't order a server with one processor. Does that apply in this case? I was thinking of one beefy processor and then 16 gigs of RAM and some other specs. Thanks, Chris.
Yeah, did we say his workstation specs are Intel Core 2 Duos, 3 gigs, 4 gigs of RAM, Windows 7 Pro 64-bit. 5 minutes? That's ridiculous. That's not right. And I don't think it's a workstation. So it sounds like that would be the server to me. 5 minutes. And then it says it was only slightly faster on the server.
Yeah.
If it's slow on the server, it's going to be a problem. And I looked at the specs for the software, and I looked at the newer version, the 2010. He said,
Right, 2010 R2.
yeah, and the specs aren't that bad. So I think there's something going on with that server. It sounds like for sure. A slowdown like that, 5 minutes. Yeah, I think it's a server. I'm looking at the specs. 2 gigs of RAM on the server. 1.4 gigahertz processor.
Right, I think we went over the specs
Yeah.
last week, and it
That's
wasn't
gonna be
anything
the
too great.
I think it'll be the